from MBDA Export Center. This is the third and final day of deal making in Africa, and we'd like to welcome everyone back. MBDA is a Chicago Export Center, provides technical assistance and then financing. My position is senior financial analyst, and we'd like to reintroduce or introduce to some our speaker for today, Dr. Wilmot Allen.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Let me bring up the screen. Okay. And we will go to full screen mode. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. So glad to see that you are with us for day 3 of the first session, really. There's a follow-up session on West Africa and South Africa that will take place September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. This is part 3 of the East Africa deal-making installment. I'm Dr. Wilmot Allen. And first, I'd like to say just thank you so much to the Chicago MBDA Export Center. It's been a pleasure to work with you on this. You all who have been listening to us for the last couple of days also know that we have partnered on a major event that's coming up the week of September 21st. So we're almost at 4 weeks away, and it will be an amazing online experience for deal making, the Diaspora Investment and Trade Deal event. And we're excited. We have 4 days of programming, 1 day of deal room, B2B matchmaking, and we think this is going to be just an excellent way to catalyze greater economic engagement between the diaspora, beginning with the U.S., contemporary, historical, with the continent. There'll be trade, there'll be investment, and so much more. If I had more time, I don't want to take time from our speakers and our presentation today just to share more about the lineup, but maybe at the end, if time permits, we will do that. We're excited about investing in Africa and learning about deal making. And I'm excited that we are joined today by 2 professionals, a lawyer. We had some tough questions yesterday regarding IP. And so we have those answers. And I was probably prudent not to hypothesize on some of the technical and legal ramifications of IP registration and trademark registration, but we will be joined by a professional today and also great insight into the country of Uganda. We're joined by another expert from Uganda who will be taking us through the investment and trade opportunities there, and also with a special orientation to encouraging diaspora engagement. But before we get started, I just want to go over on a very high level a little bit of my background for those of you who weren't with us. So I am based in Nairobi, where I've been for 5 years, on the continent on and off for the last 20, and really happy to be here and be involved in trade and investment. I work as an entrepreneur, starting a company called VentureLift Africa, which is a transaction advisory firm, as well as a fintech marketplace for connecting companies here with international resources, regional resources that help them grow and scale. That means money in terms of investors, trade partners, supply chain partners, and more. I also am a private equity investor with the RH family of funds out of South Africa. Thrilled to share with you from my experience, but also it's going to be an amazing, I think, time to hear from our colleagues. And let me just, in the interest of sort of going back over some material that we didn't adequately cover yesterday, there was one slide I wanted to make sure we went back and covered, and that was this one here. So just as a summary, yesterday we had a great conversation around trade deal making with East Africa. We gave you some perspective on that, from trading from small products with 2 companies whose revenue are less than $1 million. And then also perspective on how larger corporates are engaging as well through the lens of logistics, rationalization, and we've learned from Trademark East Africa, I think, some key insights into how to go better about planning to distribute, to transport, and navigating just the logistical network here in East Africa. Those presentations will be available, and we also learned about how to do business on the county level through the presentation of the Kenya Chamber of Commerce. And as I said before, it's really important to understand that there's a devolution here in this country and others as well, where you have business operating on the federal level, national level, but also on the county level. And we hope that those insights were valuable to you. And we also began to share with you some perspective on partners. I'm not going to go back through the slide in its entirety, but I just wanted to kind of highlight it again as a segue into the next slide, that it really is important to have partners here on the continent. And we are going to learn more about that from the legal perspective and then the deal perspective with a deep dive on Uganda in just a little bit. Deal sourcing, we mentioned some of the key partners there, the government incentives that, as we talked about yesterday, as it relates to things like special economic zones, which really do make a difference. And navigating that entire network of regulation, incentives is something that you definitely should have a partner to help you with. This is the one we didn't really talk through, but we'll just go through it high level. In trade for execution partners, there are, of course, investment banks here, transaction advisors like our firm, and then there are logistics companies. I just want to also say, because we got a lot of questions towards the end, just in terms of house rules, we encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A chat. Thomas will be moderating that. I will also try to check, but we ask also that you try to post them before the end of the presentation, if at all possible. We always will make time and welcome every question, so don't feel stressed at all about that. We just want to make sure that as we're transitioning to speakers, that we still haven't left any questions unanswered. So thank you for that. And also, all the contact information of the speakers will be made available through the Export Center and the presentations as well. We will be sending out that, I guess, shortly after today, which is the final day for East Africa. We want to fine tune some things and maybe add a few comments to that reflect some of the questions that came in. So back to trade deal execution and partners. Key steps.
Excuse me, Dr. Allen. Dr. Allen, can you make it a full screen? We're getting
sure
the presentation.
Yeah, I actually can. Sorry. Thank you, Thomas. Okay, how's that? Is that okay?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So here we are, deep knowledge of import laws and custom procedures in country of interest. You're going to hear from Sylvia Kathinji of Ashtiva law firm, and you will hear firsthand how some of those laws work in the country of Kenya and perhaps elsewhere in East Africa. Secondly, knowledge of potential trade incentives and duty exemptions. We tried to give you a sense of that yesterday when Mark Priestley from Trademark East Africa shared. That is something that it requires a lot of pre-work, obviously, and due diligence. It's also good to have a relationship with one of the investment promotion agencies, trade agencies in the country like Uganda Investment Authority to lead you through that. And it's sometimes not the case that all of the information on websites will actually be updated. So you want to make sure you actually talk to someone on the ground who works at those institutions to make sure what's reflected on the websites is actually updated. Okay, next point, effective logistics and distribution strategies. Hopefully, what was shared yesterday was very, very helpful. I think we came out of that with a better understanding of why some of the transportation costs are so high, and what's being done in terms of interventions of technology and regulation and policy to cut down on some of the delays and incentivize more companies and more of the stakeholder groups, whether it's railway, airport, last mile, third-party logistics companies, cold chain storage providers, how they all play a role in this, and how there's an effort to be made to make the entire process work more efficiently. Key steps for executing exports, please keep in mind that it's the same thing, knowing the laws, custom procedures for export, logistics, and understanding this. This is a very, very important point, which we didn't talk about yesterday, but on Tuesday we did, some aspects of currency risk. It really is important to understand the exchange rates, whether you're paying in local currency and getting your money back in dollars if you're from the US, or what country or the currency that you expect to be paid back in, and understanding what those dynamics are, the tax implications, and if you do have to exchange money, knowing where to go. There are formal institutions and there are informal institutions in most countries that do exchange, but there's a diversity of banks and forex exchanges where you can exchange money. If you're here on the ground, then obviously there are international institutions that you can work with in places like DC and most major cities to exchange money. But in general, the point is not so much about exchanging, but knowing what the risks are in terms of getting your money out, how to pay, how to manage if you're dealing with suppliers, currency risk as it relates to how they're paid and the timing of it. And so there's a lot to unpack there with that. And finally, key steps for equity investments. We focused on trade on day 2. Today, we'll be doing a deep dive on equity investments. In addition to our excellent presentations from our experts, we also will take you through a case study of both a growth equity deal and then an angel investment deal, just to give you a sense of the diversity, how those deals worked, how they were sourced, some of the financial dimensions of those deals, and then what the impact of that investment is, and that the investors will have actually aimed for. So for these key steps, strong understanding of equity ownership requirements, the limits of various countries in terms of shareholding, whether it's controlling or majority or a minority interest. We also gave you some insight into how family businesses operate in certain countries and how they're closely held, oftentimes aren't looking to take on institutional capital in terms of private equity investment to fund their growth, and understanding different cultural dynamics that relate to doing trade, or in this case, investment. And then we want to highlight this again under investment, international transaction costs that go beyond just the cost of the deal, professional services, customs, logistics. These are all costs that we talked about yesterday, and there are more that come to bear upon the price of doing business, the cost of doing business. Tax implications, you want to hire a professional for that. And there are some firms that specialize in that. We will have a presentation today by Strategic Advisors and have an excellent presentation on that. And feel free, and when we share the contact information, to get in touch with our speakers who are happy to assist you in learning more about the laws, learning about deal opportunities, and just navigating trade and investment deal making with East Africa. Co-investment partnerships and access to local intermediary networks. We gave you a sense as to the volume and the profile of investments, private equity and VC, but we didn't talk a lot about the players. In the case studies, you'll meet we'll talk about one of the growth equity investors in the region, and then an angel investor network as well. And there's something called a syndicate, where it's a group collaboration of investors that co-invest in certain deals. We'll talk about that, particularly as it relates to the angel investment. So that's part of what we mean by co-investment partnerships. And that happens in various asset categories. So it could be VC, it could be growth equity. What we are starting to see more what we call merger and acquisition transactions. I think we'll see more as a result of the recovery from COVID, where companies are looking to cash out in some case or combine with other companies to increase their market share and their competitive presence in a market. And the access to local intermediary networks, professional service firms, investment commissions, investment authorities, trade associations, advisory firms, these are all part of the equation of just being smart and being more efficient and working efficiently at transacting trade or investment. Now, I want to fast forward to, we'll come back to VentureLift at the very end. I want to now come to our presentation on doing business in Kenya, legal considerations with Sylvia Kathinji, who is a partner at Shativa Advocates here in Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome, Sylvia. So glad to have you. As I said to you before when we talked, that we had a couple legal questions regarding intellectual property. So look forward to your responses on those. We hope that the attendees who asked those questions are back with us, but they can also get in touch with you afterwards. You'll drive your slide share?
Yes, thanks, Wilmot. I'll be able to do that from my end. So I'll just try and put up my screen.
Sure. And so, Sylvia, I didn't say this before, but what we'll do is actually periodically checking, well, the structure will be to check in for questions after each presentation, and don't forget to put yours in full screen. As I'm looking at the chat, I don't have any questions so far from mine, from my presentation, but after yours, we'll take some time to allow the attendees to ask questions. I have a few questions for you as well. So you have as much time as you need, but within 30 minutes.
All right, thank you. I'll try and keep it succinct.
No, that's fine. We have 2 hours for this session, so we have plenty of time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So as I was saying, I'm really grateful to be here today just to share some of our experiences. I think that the gist of my presentation today is not so much to share the law, but the experiences that we've seen our clients go through over the last few years. Kenya is a very dynamic market. Regulations change a lot, but it's nothing that is too complex. In most cases, regulations actually support investment and business, except where the extraneous circumstances like COVID-19, which I'll speak to later. So for today, I just want to take you all through a few things which I've highlighted there, just to take you through investing in Kenya, and if you'd be interested in setting up a business vehicle, what that would look like and what that would mean. Management structures in terms of, your corporate governance and corporate accountability, especially if you have your parent company situated or domiciled abroad. What are some of the measures you'd need to think through? Some investment considerations, especially in relation to currency and inflow of funds into the country. Employment considerations. I think this is an area we've seen most people sort of not pay attention to, but it becomes such a big problem. And I think Wilmot, you mentioned this yesterday in terms of understanding culture, in terms of understanding how to interact with people, whether they're independent contractors or employees. Tax considerations, which are really broad, but having a general idea would be able to help you understand the cost of doing business in the country. Deal making, and specifically in relation to either mergers or equity investments, and what are some of the legal and regulatory considerations, as well as some key regulatory developments that have been occurring over the last few months since COVID. Before I dive into that, I just want to share a little bit about me and my firm. Ashitiva Advocates is a 10-year-old firm. Actually, we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. We are a boutique firm that's focused on their clients. And our philosophy is we like growing with our clients. And therefore, this is a platform that I think is mutually beneficial for the firm as well as yourselves. We focus on those key areas: energy, mining, and infrastructure. We have a number of transactions that we are advising on setup of power plants and that sort of thing. Technology, media, and telecommunications, including both the transactional work, but also policy and regulatory work. Real estate, banking, and financing, a lot of property developments, advising on the changing landscape in especially with the onset of digital financing. And dispute resolution sort of plugs into all these other departments to give that support in case disputes arise and that sort of thing. And also commercial corporate is sort of cross-cutting because it supports all the other key thematic areas. Over the course of our 10 years, we've been very fortunate to have a very supportive client base as well as very good legal talent. And we've managed to get a number of internationally recognized awards that are there on my screen, local ones from the Law Society of Kenya. I think that one was a very big one for us. So we were very happy about that. But also internationally and regionally under the African Legal Awards, the IFLR 1000 and Chambers, Global Chambers in this year specifically for our project and energy work. Okay, on the slide there, you'll see that I have a few types of legal entities that I have listed out there that would be of interest to you in case you're interested in setting up in the country. I outlined them in order of the most common business vehicle and the one that's preferred the most by foreign clients. So the first one is a private limited liability company. It's the most common. The reason why most clients or most foreign clients are interested in this specific legal vehicle is because it creates that separation or legal separation between the local entity and the foreign entity. But some clients choose to go for the branch of the foreign company, which means that the foreign entity is recognized locally in Kenya, meaning there's no separate legal entity. Most of the people who go for this as their preferred choice seek to maintain as much control as possible, meaning that they want their foreign board of directors to be their local board of directors to sort of maintain that level of control at a local level. But one of the main problems of this form of entity is that it's subject to a higher income tax bracket of 37.5%, even in cases where the government of Kenya has extended, tax measures because of COVID. You see entities like this do not get to enjoy those kind of tax benefits. Then we have the public limited liability company, which is two-pronged. There's a public limited liability company that is not listed on the stock exchange. Most people who seek to set up in this form are either seeking to purchase agricultural land because foreign entities are not allowed to hold agricultural land, and it can be a problem. Say, for instance, if you have a project that involves acquisition of land, it could be agricultural or it could be, industrial, commercial, and you want to maintain your agricultural use of land, then with a private limited liability company, even if it's minority shares held by a foreign entity, you cannot be able to hold that agricultural land. So we see some companies or some entities seeking then to register their companies in this way so that they can get that benefit of acquiring agricultural land. Of course, there are a bit more challenges in terms of how that company is set up, specifically in relation to cash consideration for shares. So, for a private company, you don't have to put in your cash consideration as you set up. But for a public company, it means that you cannot have non-cash consideration for shares in a public company. And for most startups, their founders get in by providing some kind of in-kind contribution towards the company, which will be quantified or valued at a later date. But for a public limited liability company, then you'd have to go through a proper valuation process that quantifies that or values that non-cash consideration before incorporation. Then there are two other models that I've put there, just, it may not be of much interest to most of you, but for people who have, charitable interest in the country, and it could be anything. It could either be financing of some kind or some other social support. Then there are these two models. From my experience, they both provide very limited benefit, especially the NGO. They're overregulated. There's a lot of reporting. Yet then one benefit that they would have, which is income tax exemption, is not guaranteed. And therefore, we sort of shy away from telling our clients to use either of these two models. So in terms of management structures and key liability issues in terms of corporations and corporate governance in the country, I think is extremely similar to most jurisdictions. This one specifically, I've focused on the private limited liability company and what that would mean. It would mean if you're to set up in the country, you must have at least one natural director. Natural director meaning a human being and not a corporate entity. And that's mainly for liability purposes. Of course, the government would want to, hold certain individuals accountable for actions of the company. Then there are no restrictions in terms of who can be appointed the director. You can all be foreign directors or foreign managers. If you're going to be domiciled in the country, it means, of course, you'd have to get your entry permits, which varied. It could be a work permit or it could be an investment permit. Directors and officers' liability in this case is, of course, the usual standard global fiduciary duties, where directors are expected, of course, to act with due care, with due diligence, and not conduct any criminal activities, and make sure that they meet their compliance requirements under the Act. Now, where you have a corporate structure that is separated in the sense that the parent company is based abroad and the subsidiary is based in Kenya through that private limited liability company, they are considered two distinct companies, right? But if that veil of incorporation can be lifted where it's proven there's been some fraud or there's been some wrongful trading or there's been transfer of assets mainly to evade tax and that sort of thing. As you consider setting up in Kenya, we think these are the main things that you should consider, at least in terms of setting up a legal entity. There are no restrictions whatsoever in terms of foreign investments, but there are certain restrictions in relation to shareholding in certain sectors. Say, for instance, and I've outlined there, for the aviation sector, 51% of voting rights must be local. Insurance companies, foreigners cannot hold more than 2/3 of that shareholding value. Telecoms has been for the longest time 20%, but it's been increased to 30%. Banks as well, it's not necessarily foreign shareholding, but there's no one singular entity or person who can hold more than 25%. Engineering as well, it must be held by 51% ownership by Kenyans, and mining in relation not to prospecting, but actual mining, 35% of local equity, as well as an additional 10% of state control. So generally, there are no exchange control restrictions. Hard currency, dollars, pounds, etc., euros are, traded across or used as actually trading currency in Kenya. But then the only thing that you would need to be aware of is that payments of a certain amount, of course, due to anti-money laundering considerations, would have to be supported by the right documentation. And payments above a certain amount, $500,000, would require Central Bank of Kenya notification. We've seen actually a few cases where the central bank withholds bulk of money because they're not satisfied with the source of funds that the client has. For employment considerations, I think for Kenya, one of the things that you must take into consideration is that we have a jurisdiction where employees are highly protected. You cannot, underestimate the level of rigor courts take in terms of protecting employees. Just recently, we had a client who had an independent contractor, and this client is domiciled in the US with no presence here, but they'd engaged an independent contractor for about 8 months, and this guy went to court, and it's proving difficult because he's saying for all intents and purposes he was employed by this company. And of course, we have to advise the client to put in place certain measures to ensure that the relationship between them and the independent contractor is really arm's length, where you do not control their time, they work using their own tools, just to show that it's sort of mirroring that sort of gig economy. But even having said that, still, I mean, the court has so much discretion and so much power to determine whether there's an employment relationship there. Of course, the main risk there is if an employment relationship is considered in place, it means therefore the company would be liable to pay, this employee any tax benefits that accrue under Kenyan law, or worst case, actually, employment tax, which can be pretty heavy. But beyond that, assuming then you choose to set up and have employees in Kenya, of course, there are those basic things that need to be done. Of course, you'd have to register with the relevant agencies as an employer and issue them with written employment contracts, remit their PAYE, which is their tax, and their social security, etc. We always advise clients never to enter into net contracts, net contracts being contracts that refer to the pay that's the employees take home. So we advise for employment contracts to be drafted in a way that it's all inclusive, so that you kind of know what your cost of doing business in Kenya is. Then there are other things that are very peculiar, like sexual harassment policy. It's become a big issue in Kenya, where if you have more than 20 employees, you must have a policy statement in place. Foreign employees must always have work permits. Of course, it takes a bit of time to secure those work permits, but before that, there are certain temporary documents that can be provided as the foreign employees get their work permits. They would obviously be subject to local tax. They'd be taxed like any other Kenyan for as long as they meet the tax residency rules, meaning they'd have to be in the country for about 183 days. And unless your company or your entity has a preferential arrangement with the government, and in this case specifically the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to grant your staff and the organization tax exemption on PAYE. Now, the other thing that is usually not foreseeable for most people is that it's not possible to terminate employment contracts at will, meaning you cannot just wake up and terminate an employment contract. You have to go through due process, meaning if you're restructuring your business or if you want to shut down, you have to go through a redundancy process. If you're not happy with someone's performance, you'd have to go through a proper performance improvement process. If someone has done something that is unethical or has breached company rules, you'd have to go through a very elaborate disciplinary process and that sort of thing. So it becomes very important, therefore, for employers or for companies to think about this, to limit their costs. It can be very expensive in terms of damages, can be up to 12 months pay, especially for senior level employees. It could be a big problem, plus legal fees. Tax considerations, there are a lot of, the tax regime in Kenya is extremely dynamic. It's very broad, and this kind of just gives an overview of what, appetite of the Kenya Revenue Authority is. So for a normal company, corporate income tax is normally 30% surplus income, but this has come down to 25% because of COVID. Of course, in due course, it's expected that it's going to go up. Value-added tax as well in terms of goods and services that are subject to tax is at 14%, down from 16 due to COVID. Capital gains tax, if you're selling property, that would be subject to capital gains and that sort of thing. Now, what would be most important for you, I think, is that fourth bullet there, which is withholding tax. If you're setting up in Kenya and of course you're domiciled abroad, either as an individual or as a company, and you expect dividends on your foreign shareholding, the company domiciled locally would have to withhold tax at 15%. Initially it was 10%, but due to COVID, it's been increased to 15%. The government's approach has been to sort of cushion locals, but find a way of also keeping their tax base sufficient to be able to cover government needs. IP royalty is the same thing. There's a withholding tax there that's pretty high, which is at 20%, and custom duties then also both import and export depends on the nature from 0 to 25%. Now, the other area that is crucial is specifically mergers and acquisitions, or investment in equity in companies that are based here. Now, there are two broad regulatory regimes, and the first one is the merger control regime, which is obviously more broad than Kenya and applies to transactions that would have a cross-border effect. And the Competition Act is local, it's purely Kenyan, and it's for Kenyan businesses. Now, in selecting which regime would apply, it depends on the effect of the transaction. Would it be a cross-border transaction or a local transaction? This is one of the most challenging regulatory areas in the country. We've seen clients have a bit of a hard time there in terms of meeting compliance requirements of the Act. Of course, our main advice, the thing that we advise clients upfront is that the penalties can be extremely punitive. If you implement a deal without the regulatory approval, penalties can be up to 10% of your annual turnover, which is pretty high. And of course, the approval process is, in some cases, depending on the complexity of the deal, can be time consuming. The outcome can go either way. It could be rejected, it could be granted with stringent conditions. Of course, what they look at is primarily consumer protection and market competition. What we therefore advise clients is immediately a deal is going through is begin engagement with the regulatory authorities. They are pretty much open, and we normally do this so many times on a no-name basis, reach out to them and give them, broad strokes of the proposed transaction and see where their head is at. And that way we're able to guide the client, of course, manage expectations heavily and articulate, of course, the benefits of this transaction. What would it mean for the country? What would it mean for consumers, etc., for employees, and the general economy? And of course, the number one rule is never implement the deal before you get that regulatory approval. We've seen clients where a US company was, purchasing a local company, and the announcement was made in the press in the US before regulatory approval here, and it became a big problem. Actually, this client was slapped with penalties of up to 10%, which unfortunately they're grappling with for months now. Finally, the most recent regulatory development, and I'll start with at the beginning of the year, which really should be of interest to most of you. Kenya's sort of matured in terms of where it is in terms of enabling access to laws, access to, you know, some of these regulations. So at the beginning of the year, we had the company beneficial ownership regulations, which means that, you know, companies now are mandated to publish with the company's registry, you know, the beneficial owners of their beneficial owners. I know in the past there was no that requirement, but of course one of the biggest challenges that we were having is that some shareholders prefer to remain private or confidential. That information is kept as private as confidential, but must be disclosed to the registrar of companies. They're in the process of digitizing that, and with time this should be done easily online. And also in the same breath, I mean, the jurisdiction has sort of matured where you're able to do a lot of transactions online, you know, register a company online. We now have recognition of e-transactions, e-signatures, documents can be signed electronically. There's a bit of a challenge at the lands registry because it's a very, very controversial issue. I mean, land in Kenya has always been a controversial issue. So it's been a problem in the land sector, but within the company's registry, everything is done online. And I mean, you could check from the US or from wherever. If you wanted details of company X, you're just a click of a button away. We also have the specific legal and tax measures that were, you know, promulgated immediately after COVID-19. I think there were two broad ones, or rather three, if I may say. One is in relation to companies, of course, just trying to ease doing business for companies, specifically holding of meetings. Now we recognize, you know, virtual meetings as part of, you know, legitimate way of companies to hold their meetings. Then the second one is tax measures. Majority of the tax measures actually were done to support medium and small businesses, individuals, and local companies. And that's why you saw, I said earlier that we have, you know, companies not paying much tax. But at the same time, I mean, whereas we've had gains in that end, the government has, you know, increased or eroded some tax benefits it used to offer, you know, investors. Say, for instance, in the energy sector and in the power sector, we had, you know, investment deductions in relation to tax of up to 100% or 150%, but that has been reduced significantly. Most of the, you know, tax exemption that was granted in the energy sector has been pulled back. You see issues like foreign shareholding. I mean, for EPZ companies, previously they were exempt, you know, in terms of withholding tax paid back to foreign shareholders. But right now it's actually currently at, I think 10 or 15%, I can't remember from the top of my mind. But we don't expect that these measures will be, you know, will remain for a long period of time, possibly for the considerable future as, you know, the country tries to grapple with COVID. But in the long run, you know, to sort of get back to government strategy in terms of enhancing foreign investment, then we're likely to see, you know, these tax benefits coming back to foreign investors. Thank you. Wilmot, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. So I just checked the chat, and there is a question about cost savings in terms of saving money, handling and going through and navigating the legal processes and the administrative processes of starting a business, I presume, and the implications of just getting set up here if you want to do that. Is there a recommended pathway to save money? I can comment on that from my experience and be there, but and I'm still looking for it actually. so look forward to your insight into that. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really good question. I think that ultimately, I mean, there are certain costs that you cannot get away from related to, you know, setup of course, you'd have to pay your official costs and everything. The thing that I would say is at the very beginning, before venturing into anything, the best thing is to get complete, legal and tax advisory, so that as you venture in, you know exactly what it is that you're getting into. Of course, with time, then, I mean, and we do this with a lot of clients, is we help a lot with corporate structuring and tax structuring, tax planning, to sort of bring down that burden in terms of tax. But there are certain basics that ultimately, a client cannot run away from, which is, especially related to employment, if you choose to go down that route, if you choose to, offer certain services and that sort of thing. But in the long run, I mean, from what I've seen, I think from companies that have been able to mature through, they've been able to get their balance and find a way of saving on tax here and there.
Got it. Okay. So thank you for that. One other question around that is, what advice would you give to someone who tries to navigate cost savings by working with sort of independent legal counselors as opposed to large firms? For people with small companies, I know that's something that sometimes makes sense, but what should business owners be conscious of in terms of the risk of doing that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's one of those things that either side has benefit. I mean, I've seen the value, honestly, of having in-house counsel, because they get to immerse themselves in the business, and they understand, very properly what, their business needs are, what their risks are, and that sort of thing. And they're based in-house, and therefore they're able to provide that consistent support throughout, and the cost is basically their salary. But having said that, there are certain things that in-house counsel cannot do, right? They may not be able to go to court for you, obviously, either due to one expertise, and most in-house counsel, of course, are corporate lawyers, but more importantly is that they would not be in a position to, because of potential conflict of interest, and therefore it becomes very difficult to manage that. Even in situations where you have, in-house counsel as an individual or as a full team, it is very difficult to run away from external counsel. Now, the thing that, the advice that I would give you is, if then you obviously will have legal needs. The best thing to do is find a firm that fits you, hopefully, a firm like ours, but basically agree on a suitable fee arrangement. And it could be a retainer base, where you can tap into this legal expertise as and when you go. So if you have a transaction that you need to bounce off somebody, or if there's an agreement here and that sort of thing, you can always get that very broad legal support. Of course, there are certain things that would be outside the scope of such a retainer. Of course, they're larger, more complex transactions, but for your daily or everyday legal needs, it's really possible to have a very favorable retainer. I've seen it work, especially for a lot of startup companies, and with time and as they grow, of course, both the firm and the client get to benefit from that relationship.
Great. Are there minimum wage laws here? Can you talk about the structure in place for labor pay and labor rates, and what some of the considerations are going forward, especially in light of COVID, how that might have impacted the regulatory environment for that?
Yeah, yes, there's definitely minimum wage, something to, I think it varies per sector, but for the minimum, I guess would be about 100 to 150 dollars per month, all inclusive, and in that case there's no tax applicable to that pay. But as of course the pay increases, or the tax increases as well. But the advice that we give clients, which I said at the beginning, is you sort of have an all-inclusive contract where it's clear to the employee that their cost of employment. If you're hiring me for $1,000, that $1,000 is inclusive of my PAYE or my tax, so that the company does not have to go to dip into its pockets to pay or gross up that tax, employment tax and income costs.
Great. You talked about foreign control of land. I just want to unpack this notion of holding land here, because it's not always straightforward. Some land, is there a difference between land that you can only like have a 99-year lease for, as opposed to owning outright? Can you talk about that, just in case there are some people who are thinking about coming and investing and building, for example, a manufacturing facility here?
Okay. So the good thing is, I mean, foreign companies, fully owned foreign companies, you can have or hold land in Kenya. Okay, so majority of the land, especially in Nairobi, is held through 99-year or 999-year leases. Okay, the only type of land that is not available to foreign individuals or foreign companies is agricultural land. And this land, in most cases, of course, the title is absolute, meaning that it's not on lease, it's a freehold interest title. But if then, I mean, it's absolutely crucial for you to have that agricultural land, or if that's the, you know, the core of your business, then we would recommend then you incorporate your company as a public company, which need not be listed on the stock exchange. And through this company, then you can hold this agricultural land. And just to mention, I know most times when we say public company, most of our clients either think they have to be listed on the stock exchange, or you have to have, you know, more than 50 or numerous shareholders. You don't need to. Okay, you can be as many as 2 or as 1 or as 7. The main thing is just to make sure then you comply with requirements of public companies under the Act, which are not so different from a public company, I mean from a private company, and you get that benefit of being able to hold agricultural land in Kenya.
Great. So recently there was a 30% rule for local ownership in technology. Is that different than what the factoids you put up about 30% in telecom, or is that the same thing? And if
Yes.
it's different, what is the difference?
It's the same thing. So, you know, companies that are generally regulated by the Communication Authority of Kenya, so tech companies, media companies, etc., would therefore need to comply with that shareholding requirement. Previously, it was just 20%, but it recently increased to 30%, and therefore we're seeing most clients trying to figure out how they're going to meet these compliance requirements.
Yeah, but how well is that enforced? Because, as you know, there's been a little angst among the entrepreneurial young entrepreneurs here as it relates to the tech sector in terms of foreign ownership. And it seems like if the 20% rule was maintained and enforced well, that we would not, you know, have heard about this, and there wouldn't be this growing concern among young entrepreneurs. It's an issue within the tech ecosystem here. So just in general, I guess, in terms of, that's more of a general question about enforcement. Is it done based upon like an annual audit? Is it done through some other procedure? Does the tax authority get involved? How are these local ownership requirements enforced?
So that's a very good question. So previously, at least from my experience, what I've seen is that they would either do, you know, either spot checks, but whenever you have to seek for your license, especially companies in the media sector, the ones that you know, they have no way of escaping this, then, you know, you cannot get your license until you satisfy them that, you know, you've met your compliance requirements in terms of that shareholding. So there are tech companies, possibly some of a certain nature, that have been able to you know, operate without this license. But, you know, the system in Kenya is getting extremely sophisticated. I mean, the Kenya, each of the government regulators nowadays speak to each other. The company's registry is connected to the Revenue Authority, to the other regulators, and it'll be, with time, of course, they're looking to have, you know, one sort of system where you're able to to have one platform, and it will be difficult with time. We've seen clients who've been completely unable to get their license renewed because they can't meet this requirement. And something that I forgot to mention when I was talking about COVID-19 and possibly I should have brought that up is, in the near future, there's going to be regulations on fintech. The Central Bank of Kenya is very keen on this, and with this kind of developments, therefore, it will be difficult where you have multiple regulatory agencies interested in the digital sector for companies to run away from specific type of obligations in relation to their compliance.
Great. Can you touch on the intellectual property question a little bit?
Yes.
Can we go deeper into that? So the question yesterday was registration here. Do I have to have, if I'm in the U.S., have registered there first? I guess by implication, what are the costs, and sort of a little bit about the process as well.
Okay. So I forgot to mention about intellectual property. So the thing with intellectual property, I mean, we normally advise clients, you have to have a strategy around IP, okay? And which should be linked, of course, to a business strategy. So if you know that you will have business interests across multiple jurisdictions and not just the US and Kenya, therefore your IP strategy would be to register your intellectual property rights under international regulations that give you very broad protection. Now, assuming you register your trademark in Kenya today, you don't have that protection in another jurisdiction. Assuming you register that same trademark in the US, and we've seen this with big companies, they have the IP protection in Britain or in the US. They enter this market, but they find, local person has registered that same trademark, and it becomes a very big problem because they had not yet foreseen, that they would want to, venture into a certain market. And of course, in that case, then you'd have to go through a dispute resolution process where the court is the one that will determine, okay, who has rights over this name and this mark. Now, if then your focus is to have, broad cross-border type of business, then the number one thing, it may be more expensive and in the short term, but it would give you much more protection. So right now we have a number of international and regional treaties that offer that kind of protection. There are some that are specific to West Africa, ARIPO. We have the Madrid protocol, which is global, where if you register your trademark under the Madrid protocol, then you have protection in multiple jurisdictions. But then over and above that, I mean, you can choose to say, okay, my brand is very strong in Kenya, and therefore I want to, fortify that brand and protect that brand more, and also register it here in Kenya, over and above the international protection. And the same goes to patents, which are much, much more complex. I mean, it's in relation to know-how and that sort of thing. So if you have registered your patent in the US, then the thing that I would say before registering it in Kenya, what you'd want to do is see if you can broaden its scope to have some sort of international protection. And obviously, since Kenya is a signatory to most of these international treaties, then you'd get some broad cover. But if Kenya becomes such a significant market for you, then you can go that step further and register in Kenya as well. For the trademark application process, it's pretty easy for as long as you have your mark and your name ready. I mean, you just submit your search documents at the Kenya Industrial Property Institute, and they'll give you results and tell you whether or not that mark exists, and then they proceed to register. There's an advertisement period, and then they gazette it. Now, that process can take 6 months, but the good thing is that your protection is deemed to be effective from the date you applied. So assuming you applied on 20th August 2020, but you get your protection in December, I mean, this trademark would be considered yours from today. So if there are any infringements that may have occurred from today, then you have that protection. For patents, it's much, much more complex. Of course, you'd need a technical expert to advise on the patent and whether it meets requirements of the law. And also, depending on the sector, sometimes in most cases we have to draw in sector experts. So if it's an engineering patent, we'd have to draw in an engineer to sort of help in crafting the applications for patent. The patent application process takes much, much longer. It can take almost a year. There's a lot of back and forth with the Kenya Industrial Property Institute, and it's pretty expensive, and you can get to about $10,000. For a trademark, it's relatively fair. It's about $1,000, which includes both legal fees and official costs, depending on the number of classes that you want to register in.
All right, thank you. This is the last question for me. And I'm just checking the chat. It doesn't seem as if there are any more questions there right now. But on the IP question, there's also a push for greater protection, particularly for younger entrepreneurs here. I know that's something that the ICT minister has been engaged on, IP protection for Kenyans versus foreigners. And we know all over the world those things can be an issue, particularly just given that there's a lot of international activity and engagement around supporting tech ecosystems. Can you, for those who might be interested in engaging with the tech ecosystem here, specifically, can you talk briefly about some of those protections for Kenyan IP versus foreign?
Okay. I mean, beyond what I was explaining earlier, I mean, the law hasn't yet, followed government spirit or government policy in terms of protection. It remains as it has been for the last very many years. It's really, so it's been so much on a first come, first serve basis where, we've seen unscrupulous people take sort of, take advantage of young entrepreneurs. And if they have the financial muscle to, get these protections much, much faster. The only thing that I have seen is that court decisions have started to become a bit more flexible, where courts have not just interpreted the law strictly in terms of, okay, who applied for this protection, when was it applied, who did it belong to, etc., but they consider much more broadly what the circumstances of the case are. And this is actually, interestingly, one of the areas where if I had a challenge with IP issues, then the court would be a safe place to go look for interpretation, especially where the law is unclear, but circumstances favor you strongly, or where circumstances show that there was some undue or some bad faith on behalf of another party.
Great. Sylvia Kathinji, Eshitiva Advocates, thank you so much. We will for sure take any inquiries that follow up from this presentation and direct them to you, but we look forward to partnering with you all. Thank you for your time. And one last thing I wanted to get in really quick, if there are special incentives from the government in terms of investment incentives that relate to tax breaks, where is the best source for that to figure out? Is that going to Ken Invest? Is it going, where do you find out that information if you don't know law firms? Now they know Eshitiva Advocates, but where would one find out that information?
That's a very good question. So, the thing is, because tax issues are anchored in law, and they change a lot. I mean, in January, the tax regime that was there has completely shifted by now. So what normally happens is, if you're trying to look for information related to applicable taxes and exemptions, thankfully nowadays we have a lot of information on the internet. So if you go to the Kenya law reports, of course this is the most valid, where you'd be able to find various tax laws, but of course you would need help interpreting those tax laws because they are read together. You'd find some of these rates indicated there. So if you wanted to find, say, exemptions, VAT exemptions that apply to the energy sector, then you'd have to go to the VAT Act under the, the Kenya law reports, and sort of dig through that until you get to a schedule where you see those exemptions or incentives, or any other tax regimes. But then, having said that, of course, that's a very onerous and tedious and very difficult process. I mean, even for lawyers themselves, it's not easy. But what normally happens is immediately the budget is passed each year, and the Finance Act of each year is passed, then there's some sort of stability. And after that, there's a lot of analysis going around. So from firms like mine or KPMG or Deloitte or PwC, you will see a lot of this information on the website, where you're able to sort of pull some of that information and get what is relevant to your sector or to your business, etc. But for the most valid, of course, the Kenya law reports would be the go-to.
Great. So that's also a way of you saying, if you really want to know, call you.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, great. We got you. That's a good way to transition. Sheila Advocate, Sylvia Katenji, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you so much, Wilmot.
We're next going to learn about investing and doing trade with the country of Uganda. This is, I think, going to be a really good presentation and timing, because there are a lot of new initiatives going on to attract investment and to simplify trade. So for this, we welcome Sheila Munginzi of the Uganda Investment Authority. Welcome, Sheila. I think you're on mute. Okay, so let me just check the chat. Yes, so I answered all the questions from the legal. Now we're back with you. So Sylvia, we have about 30 minutes as well. I think I've looked at your presentation. It's going to be really informative. And then if there are questions at the end, I will ask from the attendees. If not, I have some of my own. So welcome and thank you so much for joining. We look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe let me share my
you want
screen.
To drive, or
Pardon?
Are you going to show your slides? You will.
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yes.
Okay.
Let me do that. And can everybody see this?
Yes, so like me, I think you need to put it on full screen.
Is that okay?
There. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Wilmot. I will try to go through this as fast as possible. I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and I also want to thank Sylvia for a very insightful presentation, because quite a number of legal issues that she touched are pretty much the same in Uganda, although more developed in Kenya. So thank you very much, Sylvia. So let me just breathe through this. I'll just, I know that you've been meeting for a number of days, so I won't dwell that much on information on East Africa, because you may have it. I'll just highlight a few things about East Africa, Uganda, and share the comparative cost drivers, because I think these are very important for someone to know when they're seeking to do business in a destination. And I'll also share some trade and investment statistics, investment opportunities, and just a little peek into the incentive regime and our services that try to make doing business easier in the country. So why East Africa? Why we think the African American diaspora should consider East Africa? I think you've been told in the past days that East Africa is resource rich, and Uganda as well, in terms of resources, in terms of minerals, in terms of people. And we are thankful that the cost drivers are coming down. Of late, we did have, it was a very high cost destination, especially in Uganda. The power was high, the infrastructure not very developed. But because government has put quite a bit of investment in infrastructure, road network, and there are a number of efforts to do East African Transport Network, the rail, and there's increasing effective demand. So cost drivers are coming down. You can't do business. Returns on investment are increasing, and there is a market that's able to buy. So it is steadily becoming a very viable destination for business, and I think that is why VentureLift Africa is focusing on the region. Very quickly, just to take you through what kind of economy Uganda is. All sectors are liberalized for investment, practically all of them, apart from the making of firearms, I think, but every other sector is open. 100% foreign-owned investment is permitted. You can have all the shareholders and owners foreign. Free inflow and outflow of capital, no restrictions. Even the taking out of profits, as if you paid all the taxes that you're supposed to pay, and I think Sylvia has outlined quite a number of them, then you're free to take out all the rest the way you please. And we are part of a growing viable market. Not only the EAC, COMESA, SADC, but part of the African Continental Free Trade Area. If you see, Uganda is at the very heart, so we consider ourselves a hub. We are a bit far from the seaport, but most of our trade comes through Kenya. But if you set up in Uganda, you can be a hub that is able to distribute to the rest of the inner Great Lakes and the inner East Africa. So we consider Uganda to be a gateway to quite a bit of market in the region. Just to give you a little insight about why I say the cost drivers are coming down. In Uganda, the cost of power is relatively competitive to that of Kenya. Right now, we are still a bit high at about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. But for large industry, it's 5 cents per kilowatt hour. The property rates are also competitive if you want to rent and do business in rented warehouses or offices. And we also know that our labor in Uganda is available and quite competitive. Why I say competitive is that in Uganda, it's very easy to get labor. Labor is very available. Labor, they're trainable. Actually, according to the World Economic Forum, Uganda ranks third in regards to labor availability. This is a plus and a minus. It could also mean that there are too many people who don't have jobs. So we have a gap in industry and we need investors to set up industry so that more of the labor is employed, but someone would not find a problem getting labor to work. And I already said the costs are quite comparative. If you look, actually, Uganda is least cost when it comes to labor. Sylvia touched a bit on the labor costs. They are more or less uniform within the region, but if I can give you a breakdown for unskilled labor, it would be about $50 per month. And then skilled labor would range from 150, 200, and then there's professionals go to much more. There's a ladder that you follow. Professionals would be 500 and above. That said, we do not have a minimum wage in place yet, which is a plus and a minus, but those labor costs are negotiated on the market. But there's a move to try and get a minimum wage for labor. The quality of life, I won't go through this because you will get the slides. allow me to go straight into what are the kind of products that one would expect to trade in, export from Uganda. They are majorly agricultural. You can see from that list. We do have a gap in processed foods. You'll be surprised that, however, we have so much fruit, we have so much coffee, but when you go to our supermarkets, you will find that we do still import juices from the Middle East, a lot of juice from South Africa, Kenya, and yet we do have fruit that can be processed so that we can get more value for the products. So that's an area that we would like to invite African Americans in the diaspora to invest in. Just to give you an insight into our balance of trade, that's the way our imports, our import side looks. We do import quite a bit from China, like many other countries, and India. And when we go to the export side, we wish the story was the same, but it isn't. Most of our exports go to Kenya, UAE, South Sudan, Rwanda, and DRC Congo. But this also testifies to the fact that we have developed the trade networks within the region. So anyone looking to do business within the region, trade within the region and beyond, can also look at Uganda, because we have developed a strength as far as an export platform is concerned. Within the sub-Saharan country, within the sub-Saharan region, you will notice that half of our exports go within the region. So anyone looking to do business within the region would be well placed to set up here. When it comes to investment, I'm glad to say that we are second forerunners to attracting foreign direct investment within the East African community. Of course, Kenya, our economic big brother, has more in FDI stocks, and we are playing catch up, but it means that we are a viable country to set up in. You'll see even in all these countries within the East African region, they do attract quite a lot of foreign direct investment. So that goes to show that there are a number of investment opportunities within the countries. You may ask yourself, where is the FDI coming from to Uganda? It's majorly coming from China, India, the UK. And when I say the UK, maybe you need to understand a little bit about our history. A long time ago, we had a huge Asian population in the country. And then we also had a very interesting president who used to do things haphazardly. One day he gets up and he says every Indian should leave the country. That was our president, Idi Amin, and indeed every Indian left. But when they left, they went to UK, Canada, America. But when this present regime came about 30 years ago, government said, no, you had developed the country, come back and take up the investments again because they had been run down. So this Asian, what do I want to call, okay, Ugandan Asian diaspora came back to Uganda, but when they came with their acquired nationality. So you see United Kingdom, those are some of the Asian diaspora who left, who are investing quite a bit in the country right now. This is a list of investment opportunities where someone looking to set up a manufacturing enterprise can set up virtually in all those areas, and services, tourism, and we've got finance, education, and healthcare. There are quite a number of of projects that we can share with anyone who is interested. I just wrote a sample of about 3 of them. This is a government. We do have both government and private projects that you can come and invest together with the people in Uganda, or if you want, you can come and totally set up your own company with 100% ownership of yourselves. But this is an interesting project that government is looking to partner with any private investor. We have an investment arm, the Uganda Development Corporation, and they're seeking to partner with any company that is interested to invest in a food processing plant. There's also another project. This is in tourism. It's also a public-private partnership project. We do have a public-private partnership law in place. So one would not find any problems or gray areas in partnering with a government entity to set up business. And many of these feasibilities by the government entities are complete. So one would just need to use the feasibility that has been done and do their own further feasibility if they would like. Tourism is a very viable sector because you'll find that we do have a number of unique products. We cannot compete with the Kenya safari, but we can compete on other products like birds. We can compete like the gorilla. We can compete the natural mountains and all that. But the problem is we have a gap when it comes to accommodation. Now there are some private entities that would like to partner with people. Government has this project, but someone can also come into the sector and invest on their own. This is an IT project. It is also a public-private partnership project. I just wanted to show you that there's a mix of projects that one can come and invest in. When it comes to trade, the trade potential is high. There's a lot of export that can be done through the free zones. Now, our free zone activity is still quite new, about 5 years. It's not as developed as Kenya, but you'll find that government is able to actually license a standalone investment as a free zone if it fits all the criteria. And some of the incentives that are within the free zones are outlined here. There are quite a number of exemptions, and these can easily be accessed by both people who are investing from out of the country and those living in Uganda. Of course, the thresholds, there's some distinction as you see on the screen. But the major benefit that you see here, the 10-year tax exemption holiday, if you've had chats with Trademark East Africa and Kenya, then you know that when we say exporting 80% out of the domestic market, we mean the EAC. I hope I can go on, because if I go through this, it will take quite a bit of time. We also have trade potential through exporting through AGOA. And among the top traded commodities from Uganda are coffee, flowers, textiles, apparel, and accessories. We do have an AGOA office that would be able to support anyone who wants to do trade through there. And any other trade is facilitated by another entity called Uganda Export Promotion Board. But exporting from Uganda really is not difficult. All you need is an export license from that board. But of course, there are issues a number of times when it comes to quality assurance. Those are some of the things that an exporter would have to look into but we do have a Uganda registration service. No, we do have it's a Uganda National Bureau of Standards that is partnering with global agencies to ensure that the quality of products coming from Uganda is suitable for international trade. Just a peek into the incentive regime. I won't go much into it, but government has provided incentives, and all these are in the tax laws. As Sylvia was telling you, you just need to go to the tax laws, and they are all non-discriminatory, because if you put them in the tax laws, it means anyone can access them. But there are also sector-specific incentives that are in place, and these can also be accessed by both domestic and foreign investors. We do have a new investment code. It was just passed last year, 2019. And for the first time in that code, we do have a criteria for accessing these incentives. For the first time, the code lists the priority areas. For the first time, it lays a clear criteria of what a company has to be doing as far as investment is concerned in order to access the benefits. There's got to be a percentage of citizens employed. There's got to be some proof that there's a new technology coming in. And there are also special incentives for industrial park development, because right now government is, the push really is to industrialize the country. And so we are looking a lot to industrial park development, and government cannot do it on its own. So it has opened the space also for private investment, for people who have expertise to come and set up in the industrial parks. Finally, when it comes to setting up business in Uganda, we have tried to ease the setting up of businesses. And I think this is an effort that is all over the region. But I'm glad to say that at the UIA, we do have a physical one-stop center that has all these entities in one place. And all these services can also be accessed at the portal that you see on the screen, the eBiz portal. And all this is coordinated by Uganda Investment Authority. So when you get my contacts, I'll be happy to clarify any question that you have, and also lead you through the process and give you any more information that you may require regarding investment and trade. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheila, for that presentation. Let me just check the chat. I don't think I saw any questions. No, so no new questions. Let me ask you something just related to the partners. As we've been trying to emphasize, it's important to have partners on the ground. It could be banks, private equity funds. Can you mention a few of the prominent ones? I know Pearl is one that's often referenced for private equity investment in terms of attendees.
I mentioned those that are in Uganda right now.
Yes.
Actually, the slide that you showed us was very interesting, because I saw quite a number of them are here as well. The banks, we have right. Standard Chartered Bank, ABSA, we have Citibank, we have even the Indian banks, we have, and then there are a few firms that have come into Uganda to try and venture into private equity and venture capital, but there are not many, because it's actually a new area in Uganda. We just started trying to introduce the Ugandan business community to that alternative way of financing for projects just about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's a new area that's virgin that can be entered into. So as far as the private firms involved in that area, there aren't many. But the banks that were on your slide, quite a number of them have a presence in Uganda as well.
And how is the government supporting entrepreneurship, specifically in technology, but in general? Are there special plans in place? For example, here in Kenya, there's a trade association for entrepreneurship enablers. Is there something comparable in Uganda?
Yes. The issue of entrepreneurship development is also very much focused on in our national development plan. At the moment, there is a government entity called Enterprise Uganda that does a lot of entrepreneurship training, that does a lot of preparing of businesses to start. At the UIA, we do have also a specific department for SMEs, and this one does quite a bit of looking into incubating small businesses. As we set up industrial parks, we make sure that in each industrial park, we set aside space to do workspaces for the small businesses. There's also, I think, investment funds that government does put aside to channel through the micro finance support center to enhance small businesses and build entrepreneurship. So there's quite a lot of help that government is giving to entrepreneurship development.
Great. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to stop it there. Let me just check once more, Sheila, before we transition. Okay, so no more questions in the chat. So thank you again. You already have your contact information up. We will direct questions to you as well. We appreciate the insights. We know Uganda is a great destination for both trade and investment. Thanks again, Sheila. Okay. So we have about 24 minutes left, and I want to spend some time staying in Uganda, actually taking you through a couple of case studies as we discussed that we would. One is a growth equity firm that here in Nairobi called Ascent Capital, that presence in Uganda, Ethiopia as well. And the other will be an angel investment that was here in East Africa, of course, in the tech sector. And it's an interesting company. It is housing tech in terms of aggregating through a tech-enabled vehicle the various stakeholders in the construction industry to work together, identifying supplies, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about that one next. But first, this company called CHIMS, the investor was Ascent. This project was one of my own. It's in this information is publicly available. It comes from the East Africa Venture Capital Association Impact Report from, I believe, about 2016. And this transaction is one of the mobile money deals that you probably don't hear about very much. It's a smaller one in terms of how it compares to M-Pesa, but very, very important just given some of the structural issues such as access to bank accounts and access to finance in general in Uganda, but that's actually an issue throughout East Africa and the continent. It was expansion capital for a company. The investment amount was disclosed publicly. Again, this is not anything proprietary. In the document that I referenced, $2 million, which was a majority shareholding. The revenue growth that at that time they saw that they projected was about 27%, and a relatively good-sized company by SME standards, 215. And the impact for all these deals is really, really important. East Africa Trade Investment Hub was the vehicle through which this project was facilitated in terms of the investment into CHIMS. And this is one of those situations where the investment firms or private equity firms partner with an advisory firm to support on some area of due diligence, commercial, operational, or financial due diligence. And so that was a case in the firm I was with. We supplied that, and I led that transaction. with the team. It spent part of the time. It was based here in Nairobi, but we of course had to spend a fair amount of time in Uganda. But the investment impact, there were 23 new outlets launched. And basically, what that means is, think of it. I'm trying to think of the comp in the U.S., but one way to think of these outlets are smaller retail centers, even kiosks, where you can actually get various services that are related to mobile money. So you can pay bills. Sometimes you can purchase various goods. You can add more money. You can make a payment, and so they expanded. That's why we call it expansion capital, and jobs were created. The number of independent money mobile agents grew by 300%. Those are the people who actually do the transaction. They have to have what's called float and some access to the capital to do that they use to transact between customers, and 25% growth in the transaction volume. So Ugandan founder, and the large, some of the challenges was that there was a need to increase access to bank accounts or access to finance and bank accounts were not targeted as being the way to do that. And so enter mobile money. And so that's why this transaction was really, really important. And I should say this, that it was the growth potential financial services, which still is the case, that makes so many companies like Ascent kind of bullish on investing in fintech. And it's still a growth sector. Obviously, you know, there have been some prominent stories of companies growing and taking market share. That not only in the sort of mobile money, but more specifically in the digital payment space. A fair number of them are here in Kenya. And what made a difference in this deal was, yes, the impact need, but having a presence on the ground and being able to understand the dynamics of the drivers of the mobile money business, as well as being able to assess the quality of the management, the commercial viability of the product in terms of understanding the product market fit, and the growth potential of mobile money within that region. So if you want to learn more about this, I can send you the link to where you can read the full case study, and there are others. Again, this was the Trade Association, East Africa Venture Capital Association, and their impact report around 2015. Okay. So I did not know that my screen was not showing, so I apologize for that. It is one slide, so it wasn't as if I went through the entire transaction, but let me just double down on this to make sure. First of all, can everyone see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so this is the transaction that I just described, mobile money in Uganda, $2 million investment. The investment rationale was the growth potential of increasing access to capital, access to money, banking services that you could do through your phone. And that's why this was so attractive. And I just mentioned some of the key takeaways that made a difference, knowing the local market. Not only should be able to assess the gap, but assess the talent in terms of the management going forward. Let me also take you to the next one. This is the Angel Investment ManPro. The Angel Investment Network in Africa is still in its nascence. These are transactions that total maybe up to $500,000 as part of what we call a syndicate investment, but typically can be, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. So these are not multi-million-dollar investors, are smaller, and provides seed capital really for companies, young companies. There's a great interest in tech to actually get started, to expand after they have what's called a minimally viable product, to test that out, and then begin to get paying customers and to grow their market, their customer market. And ManPro is an interesting one. This is a real company, and it is a company that, as you can see in the logo, build, monitor, and save. Those are the value propositions in terms of if you're in the diaspora, if you're in Detroit, if you're in London, if you're in Paris, you want to develop a property here, you can go through their platform to organize that with the contractor, with the supplies, et cetera, and have their technology and their team monitor the progress. You still, of course, have to come, and it's not advisable to do everything remotely, of course. And they try to find a way to help you save money. This is something I remember. I was at the summit last year in Texas, the East Africa Chamber of Commerce, and the diaspora are really invested in real estate. They have the Kenyan diaspora and many other East African diasporans. And this was something, the concept of this really resonated well. And that's why it was attractive to angels. There are various angel networks. The one that facilitated the syndicating investment, and this one were the Victoria Business Angels, working in tangent with an accelerator and its angels from Norway called Pangea, that works out of Strathmore University. At least that's where this company, or that's cohort, was hosted. And it's, again, when it says syndicate, I just want to make sure you understand that's a group investment. The investment, the total was about 160. So that's not a huge amount of money compared to larger transactions from private equity funds, even venture capital. But it was very much needed as a seed capital to give this company some money for working capital to finish its technology and more. And let me just give some of the impact highlights. One, you can see that in terms of assessing the market is really, really important. So if you do want to invest as an investor, it's really important to have an experienced local investor as a partner, or if they're not local, investors that are have a good track record, a successful track record in investing on the continent. And let me just go through these quickly. Is the attractiveness of the market was the construction industry, the growth sector. Remember, in the first session, we talked about how different economic factors begin to converge, and this is one of them. You have growing middle class, a large population, and a lot of interest in places like Nairobi because of the maturity, or the fact that its infrastructure is actually maturing. So you have a lot of hotels here, a lot of A1 hotels, A1 restaurants, and of course that means there's going to be more building to accommodate that, particularly in housing. And it was a cloud-based solution that, again, was pretty novel, and it's part of, I think, just the whole enterprise of innovation that's happening in terms of finding disruptive ways to develop new business models, to improve efficiency, offer new services, and of course, to make more money. I should say that one other thing about just understanding the way angels work is that typically you have an agreement, if you're an angel and part of a network, whereby the sponsor of the network will show you a number of deals. So say you, that tenure is, you have a 3-year sort of agreement. Each year, the agreement may be that you will be shown 10 deals, vetted, investment ready transactions that fit this early stage category, startup category of companies, and that the expectation is that a certain number of them you would be expected to pull the trigger on, that is, invest money. And you pay a subscription fee in order to be shown these deals. And what comes along with that is some assistance with early due diligence. Obviously, if it's more detailed, then there's a fee for that. And it's something that I think is taking on here in the US. You know, angel investor networks are very popular. VentureLift Africa is, for anyone interested, we are forming a diaspora one for diaspora in the US and everywhere. And anyone else who is open to working with this, we want to work with you. So let us know, let me know if you are interested in learning more about angel investor opportunities And even we plan to go out and raise a small fund to co-invest with the Angel Investor Network. Let me just say one thing before we go too far. If you are trying to contact me by email in Africa, I'm not sure if this, I was told it's throughout the world, but especially here, we were hit, our Gmail accounts were hit. So my wilmot@VLAfrica.com is actually through a Gmail business account, but the alternative one, which is not, it's on our Outlook system, is CEO@VLAfrica.com. So don't be startled if you get a undeliverable message using the first one, but CEO@VLAfrica.com does work. Okay, last but not least, let me go to some of these key takeaways. This is one of the things that we've been trying to stress, is that there is an ecosystem of partners that you need to transact trade or investment. In this case, the legal advice is really important in terms of knowing how to negotiate term sheets, especially if you're not experienced. That goes on both sides, for the entrepreneur as well as for the angel. Understanding term sheets, and not everything can be just exported from America here. In fact, very little can, in terms of the way business is getting done, because the markets are so different, and what drives consumer demand is different, the volatility of it, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things I always say when people ask me about the difference between, Silicon Savannah, which people refer to Nairobi as, and Silicon Valley, is that you have to remember a big difference as to why you see this, fast growth of some of these companies and hockey stick returns, is that in the U.S., if you're in San Francisco, you actually can start off just building a solution just for one city, right? Here, it's hard to really get that type of exponential growth just focusing on one city, unless you've identified a real niche market that's completely underserved, where the demographics align very well with the product offering, and but also is because in most developed countries, there's a larger middle class where you can navigate the fickleness of it, the volatility of it, because it's so large. Here, you don't have that luxury. And so oftentimes you have to really do the research to understand what the demand is, how that's changing, what sector, how that changes by sectors, et cetera, et cetera. And then also these last 2 points, having strong mentors, the accelerator program, which we mentioned, help coach these guys up. I was one of those mentors. That's how I met this company and have stayed in touch with them. And word to wise, if you are an angel investor living outside of a jurisdiction, it is very advisable that you have, that you require, before you commit money, local investment, if at all possible. That way you'll get an understanding of so much more of a deal. The education timeline will be shortened in terms of understanding the market, assessing the management team, assessing the product market fit. So going in as a syndicate is really the way to go. I see that we have some questions. Let me just pause here and take these questions. Okay. Great. I see that. I think the only one, well, that is more not administrative is with the public-private partnership, will the government provide equity, capital investment, land, or guarantees? So the public-private partnership does sometimes involve incentives from the government, but very rarely, from my experience, a lot of capital, unless it's a strategic sector. And so the whole point of it is to mobilize and aggregate enough partners that some of them are capital providers for that project. And there, we showed a slide, I can go back to it if it's helpful, for loan guarantors, which the African Loan Guarantee Fund is one of them, and there are others which serve that exact purpose. And then, so they're seeking out deals, and so that's more, there's more information. Exim Bank, the US Exim Bank, Afro Exim Bank, there are lots of institutions that do offer loan guarantees. Let me see if there's anything else with that. I think, let me just go up a little bit. Yeah, the others are administrative, and let me just type in my email address, just so the one that's working. So there you go, you have it. Okay, we can begin to wrap up. If there are no more questions, let me just go through sort of recap of some of the things we learned, and then before doing that, make this announcement again. We've been trying to emphasize two things before getting to this. You can join us again for insights into deal making in West Africa by coming back to where you met us today through the Chicago MBDA Export Center. The dates are September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. We're really excited about it. West Africa is both, there's greater diversity for a number of reasons, including you have Francophone and Anglophone countries, and there are peculiarities of how business gets done in each of those countries. And so it's going to be very, very interesting. We also have included South Africa in that mix, so we want to make sure you have insight into doing business there as well. We want to emphasize again, September 21st through 25th, again, Chicago MBDA Export Center and Business Center, VentureLift Africa, and others, co-sponsored by the U.S. African Development Foundation, the Diaspora Investment and Trade Deal Event. These sessions are a prelude to that, just to whet your appetite, to get you thinking about how you might want to engage with the continent. It will be Pan-African focus. So it just won't be East Africa and West Africa. We will have some representation even from North Africa. And obviously the diaspora, the global diaspora, will be part of that equation as well. Just want to remind you again of our platform. We do have an advisory firm in this marketplace which connects businesses, the trade partners, supply chain. We will launch with the event and look forward to welcoming some of you to the platform and working with us, as well as working with the Export Center, and we are partnered together. We have about 4 minutes. I'm going to turn it back over to the organizers to see if there are any final comments. I know we have a hard stop at 7, but thank you again so much for your time. Thank you for this opportunity to present. And as you can see, we've gone from day to night here. So sorry about that. I kind of lost track of that being here, but sorry, hopefully you could see me well enough during the presentation. So let's see, Thomas, did I miss anything in terms of answering questions, or is there anything else that I need to address?
No, you answered all of the questions that are out there.
Great. So is Terry still on?
Yes,
Yes.
I'm here.
Okay, so Terry, we have a few minutes, so I wasn't sure if you had any announcements to make or.
Yes, I did. Actually, first and foremost, definitely like to thank everyone for attending. It's been very insightful. It was some amazing information presented by Mr. Allen. Thank you for all the guests that came and presented the information. As mentioned in the chats, all of the information as far as contacts will be issued out to each individual participant on the webinar over the last few days. All of the slide decks will be available. And as he also mentioned, coming up September 21st through the 25th, we will have our virtual trade event. We'll be just like going to an actual trade mission. There'll be actual speakers, there'll be presentations, there'll be breakout sessions, there'll be actual deal rooms where you'll be put in place with actual stakeholders with contracts and opportunities available and in hand and ready to, do work. And I also definitely want to stress and emphasize to understand the really big picture about doing business in Africa. Africa is that last big frontier. Okay, you guys have to understand your margins. I know they talked a lot of things about tax and about different things and regulations, but you got to understand the cost of labor is still low, but it's an affordable wage which works for the local economy. So what does that mean for a business? It increases your profit margins. So if you can do business in Africa, if you can arrange a team on the ground, then you actually can increase your margins. So there's something to really, really, really think about. And also too, here's our information with discoverafricanmarkets.com. You guys can reach out to us if you have any further questions for us or Dr. Allen. We can definitely get those questions to him, as well as we look for you guys to become clients of ours, which again, we're a nonprofit organization and it doesn't cost you anything, because the most important thing, which has been emphasized, is that you're going to need a team. You don't have to be an expert on exporting, but you do want to have experts on your team. So this is exactly what we do. We were put in place and we were funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce through the MBDA specifically to help businesses export their products and services to the African market. So take advantage of that. Take advantage of that. This is your tax dollars at work. Use them, use them, use them, use them. So organizations like ourselves, organizations like Dr. Allen, we can be your eyes and ears and help you to navigate the waters, which again, it's a lot of information and you're getting it all in and you're like, okay, how can I understand this? How can I make this work? That's what we're here for, to walk you through the process one-on-one and make it happen for you. So again, thank you guys. Looking forward to seeing you guys in a couple of weeks for the next training session in which we'll be talking about West Africa, which again is another amazing place to invest, another amazing place to do business, and the opportunity is endless. So looking forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Bye.